Welcome to the Beyond Cinema studio up here at Tiff, Mr. Errol Morris. Firstly, congratulations on the film playing last night.
You mean my film?
Yes, yours.
I wanted to make sure that it was not some other film.
Donald Rumsfeld, you said at the end last night that it was one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult, series of interviews that you've done. But why is that? Was there some sort of unexpected quality to them?
Well, there's always an unexpected quality to interviews. Properly considered, you shouldn't know what that quality is going to be going into it. There's something profoundly strange or unstrange. Destabilizing is the word I would use about doing these interviews. Because it's if we're in two alternative universes, the Rumsfeld universe and then that other universe, whatever it might be. In the Rumsfeld universe, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan were great successes. 3 cheers for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In my universe, such as it is, those wars were not so successful.
Was he the person you thought he was? Did your perception of him change before and after the meetings?
Well, yes, inevitably. You spend 30 plus hours interviewing someone, it's going to change your perception of who they are. I mean, the answers to me, I thought, were often incredibly surprising. You ask a question. For example, I asked him about the war in Vietnam. He is chief of staff for President Gerald Ford. He's in the Oval Office when we pull out of Vietnam. One of the great debacles in American history. 58,000 American servicemen, over 1.5 million Vietnamese. So I asked him, what'd you learn? And he answered, some things work out, some things don't.
That's right, and in terms of the cyclical nature of these moments in history, this morning there's a headline, from Bashar al-Assad saying there is not one single shred of evidence that this chemical attack happened, that I used chemical weapons or chemical warfare. And obviously it harkens back to exactly what you were saying last night about Donald Rumsfeld's policy or statement on evidence in one of his snowflake messages. So would it surprise you to see John Kerry say something along the lines of a Rumsfeld quote about evidence in response to what's going on in Syria?
Yes and no. At the time of the Iraq invasion in 2003, 10 years ago, I had just finished The Fog of War. And I could not believe we were going to invade Iraq. I felt this really isn't going to happen. But of course, as we all know, it did happen. And it was a disaster. And continues, I might add, to be a disaster. We don't read every day about Iraq in the news, but people are killing each other in large numbers. It's not over with. It's an ongoing conflict, as is the war in Afghanistan. I like to think, I'm just asking myself, why do I even think this? I like to think that the Obama administration might have a better purchase on the nature of evidence, of what might constitute evidence and what might not. But in truth, to me, it's not what decides the issue. Say Assad did use chemical weapons on his people, as Saddam Hussein had used against the Kurds. The question in armed intervention is it going to make things better or worse? Do you really know what the effect of this is going to be? If war has unintended consequences, which it inevitably does, can you be sure that intervening in Syria is going to ameliorate the situation or exacerbate it? And if you can't be sure, you don't do it, period. I'm not an isolationist, I'm not a pacifist, but these armed interventions on the part of the United States, I don't see it. I really don't see it. I mean, there are instances, of course, where intervention made sense. But I'm not convinced this is one of them.
In terms of Rumsfeld as a person, following this series of interviews, you said that you don't know what stage, what version of the film he's watched. Has he?
I do pretty much. I know that he's seen 3 different versions of the film. We sent him the final version, which is not all that different from the penultimate version, the 3rd version that he saw.
And in addition to his notes, did you get a sense of whether he enjoyed the conversation as it transpired on screen, or was worried about his image at all?
Clearly he enjoyed it. He wouldn't have come back for 30 plus hours of interviews if he didn't enjoy it on some level. He was not constrained to do any of this. On some level, he must be concerned about his image. We're all concerned about how we appear to other people. It's part of what makes us human. But what's interesting to me about the interview is this absence of self-awareness, of self-reflection. It's the opposite of McNamara. McNamara, you have a person sitting in front of a camera trying to explain to himself and to others why he did what he did. I've heard people endlessly argue about the fog of war, but I sat there talking to him, and I can tell you my own feelings is that this was a man tortured by his past, guilt-ridden, remorseful. Although I didn't feel then, and I didn't feel after having made the film or now, that it was my job to get him to say he was sorry, because I felt, what would that mean? In The Unknown Known with Donald Rumsfeld, not an issue. Not an issue. He is proud of these wars, convinced of his own rectitude, his own correctness, his own rightness. And there is very, very, very little self-doubt or reflection.
While we're on the subject of image or perception, Roger Ebert I remember had that kind of great quote about you that, you know, he was certainly a fan of your filmmaking and compared you to Hitchcock and Fellini in terms of modern mastery of cinema. He gets an in memoriam on your film.
Yes.
Why did you feel it was important to recognize him on one of your movies?
Because of what he's really done for me and my career over so many, many, many years. I don't know if it's the correct thing to say that I owe Roger Ebert so much, but I do. My first film was at the New York Film Festival in 1978. And it was kind of amazing that the film was selected. But there was a newspaper strike. All the New York newspapers were on strike. And so I thought, it's just going to disappear. No one's going to write about it. No one's going to talk about it. And I think that actually would have happened, save for the fact that there were these two critics in Chicago who started writing about it and talking about it on television, Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel. And they reviewed it again and again and again and again. And eventually Roger Ebert put Gates of Heaven on his list of the 10 best films ever made. I would say to him, how much less are you going to like this movie than Gates of Heaven? But he was a champion, and for anybody who knew him, an extraordinary presence, fabulous writer, amazing lover of movies and culture, a force, and a force for the good. My life would be very, very different without him, and I really, truly miss him. He's someone you can never, ever replace.
Well, thank you for coming in and sharing that with us.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
Appreciate it and your films.
Thank you.
Cheers.